Emma, 24, is engaged to Jason, 26. And they've been excitedly planning their dream wedding. However, tension arose when Emma's parents learned that Jason's sister, Rachel, 34, had once been jailed for stealing food to feed her children. Emma's parents refused to contribute financially to the wedding if Rachel was invited, calling her a thief. Pressured by her family, Emma asked Jason to disinvite his sister. Jason, hurt but understanding, suggested they downsize the wedding and pay for it themselves with help from his own parents. Now, Emma is torn, wondering if she's wrong for insisting that Rachel stay away. If you've ever been torn between pleasing your family and standing up for the person you love, if you've ever been told that someone doesn't belong because of their past, then this story is yours too. I was caught between expectations, traditions, and the fear of judgment. But I've realized, silence only protects what's broken. I'm done staying quiet to keep the peace. Drop a comment with where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe. This is my journey to choose love over appearances, to build a future not on perfection, but on truth, compassion, and the people who truly matter. I never imagined that planning a wedding could bring so many emotions to the surface: excitement, anxiety, joy, and now, conflict. My name is Emma. I'm 24, and I'm engaged to Jason, who's 26. We met 4 years ago in college, during a group project neither of us wanted to do. At first, we were just two people trying to get through an assignment, but that slowly turned into late-night phone calls, shared coffees during midterms, and a connection that felt easy and safe. After graduation, we moved in together and started building a life, nothing fancy, just full of little moments and quiet understanding. Jason is the kind of person who never rushes to speak but always listens deeply. He's warm, steady, and endlessly patient, the kind of man who'll hold your hand through your worst days without asking questions, and then quietly cheer you on when you're finally back on your feet. So when he proposed last winter during a quiet dinner at home, I didn't hesitate. I said yes because I couldn't imagine my life without him in it. We started planning the wedding with hope in our hearts. Like many couples, we were trying to strike the balance between a day that felt magical and one we could actually afford. My parents were generous enough to offer financial help, which meant we could invite more people, rent a beautiful venue, and even book the photographer I'd been following on Instagram for years. Jason's parents, though not as financially comfortable, offered what they could, and their emotional support meant just as much. Everything felt like it was falling into place. We'd chosen a date, a color scheme, even had a Pinterest board full of ideas. Our guest list was growing slowly but meaningfully: family, friends, coworkers, and a few long-lost cousins we hadn't seen in years. I remember the feeling of relief and joy when I found the dress. The one that made me cry in the mirror because it suddenly felt real. I'm getting married. Then, the issue with Jason's sister, Rachel, surfaced. Rachel is older than Jason by almost a decade. She's 34 and has 2 young kids. I had only met her a few times before, usually during holidays or quick visits when the family gathered. She seemed kind, a bit tired, and very protective of her children. I never really got close to her, but I knew that she and Jason had a strong bond. He often talked about how she helped raise him when their parents were working multiple jobs and how he always admired her resilience. One day, while going over the guest list with my mom, Rachel's name came up. My mom paused, frowned, and said, "Isn't that the one who went to jail for stealing?" I was taken aback. I didn't know the full story. Just bits and pieces. Jason had mentioned once that Rachel had been in a rough situation years ago, raising 2 kids on her own with barely any help. According to him, she had stolen groceries out of desperation, not greed. But my parents didn't see it that way. They saw a criminal, a stain on what they considered an important family event. They told me, flat out, "We don't want to help pay for a wedding that a thief will be attending." It felt like being dropped into cold water. I didn't know what to say. I was torn between understanding where my parents were coming from and feeling this gnawing guilt in my stomach, because I knew Rachel wasn't some danger to us or anyone else. But I also knew that without my parents' financial help, our plans would change drastically. I brought it up to Jason that evening. I was nervous. And I hated how it sounded even as I said it. My parents don't feel comfortable with Rachel coming, and I'm wondering if it's best she's not invited. Jason looked at me with disbelief. Not angry, but clearly hurt. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't accuse me of anything. But I could see in his eyes how deeply it stung. He told me that Rachel had made mistakes. Yes, but she had paid for them. That she had done what she did to feed her children. Not for selfish reasons. That she was part of his family, and if she wasn't welcome, then maybe we needed to rethink the kind of wedding we were having. He suggested we scale things down. Forget the venue, the big reception, the expensive photographer. Just have a small ceremony paid for by us and his parents. One where Rachel could be there. It wasn't said in anger, it was said with calm conviction. He wasn't choosing her over me. But he was drawing a line about what family meant to him. And in that moment, I saw just how much this man I love truly values loyalty, forgiveness, and dignity. It made me love him more. But it also made things harder. Now I find myself at a crossroads. The dream wedding I envisioned would require my parents' money. But their conditions, excluding someone Jason loves, feel wrong. Even if they come from a place of protectiveness or fear of judgment. I wonder. If I insist on disinviting Rachel, am I betraying Jason? Or if I go against my parents' wishes, am I damaging my own relationship with them? Planning a wedding was supposed to be about love and joy. And yet here I am, caught between two families and trying to figure out which decision will hurt the least. All I know for sure is that I want to marry Jason. But right now, the path to that altar feels a lot more complicated than I ever expected. Before the drama surrounding our wedding unfolded, I only knew bits and pieces about Jason's older sister, Rachel. She's 34, almost 10 years older than Jason. And honestly, she always struck me as one of those people who carries the weight of the world on her shoulders but never complains about it. In the few times I met her, she was quiet, polite, and fiercely attentive to her two young children. She didn't speak much about herself. And truthfully, I never thought to ask. I didn't know her story, really know it, until now. Rachel had always been a bit of a mystery to me. Jason, on the other hand, admired her deeply. Growing up, their parents worked long hours to make ends meet. And Rachel often stepped in to help raise Jason, cooking meals, making sure he got to school, and protecting him from the tougher parts of their neighborhood. Jason told me once, she was more like a third parent than a sibling. At the time, I just smiled, appreciating his love for family. But I didn't fully grasp what Rachel had gone through. It wasn't until my parents brought it up, like a bomb dropped in the middle of wedding planning, that I learned Rachel had once been arrested for stealing food from a supermarket. The way my mom said it, with that tone of judgment she reserves for people she thinks are beneath us, made it sound like Rachel was some habitual criminal. But that didn't sit right with me. I needed to understand what actually happened. I asked Jason about it one evening. When things were quiet, we were on the couch, both tired from a long day. And I gently said, "Can you tell me what happened with Rachel? The arrest?" His face changed, not angry, not defensive, just sad, like he'd been carrying a weight he didn't talk about often. He told me it happened around 7 years ago. Rachel had just gone through a difficult divorce. Her ex-husband was abusive. Emotionally and financially. When she finally left him, she had nothing, no job, no car, barely any money, and 2 toddlers to care for. She was staying in a women's shelter, trying to apply for government assistance. But everything was moving slowly. She'd applied for food stamps, but the benefits hadn't come through yet. One night, after trying to stretch a box of pasta and a can of peas for 2 meals, she walked into a supermarket and filled a bag with baby formula, bread, fruit, and some microwave meals. It wasn't some grand heist. She didn't sneak in or try to stuff things in her coat. She walked in, picked up what she needed, and tried to walk out. Security stopped her at the door. She didn't run. She didn't lie. She told them the truth right there in the store. She needed to feed her kids. The manager still called the police. She was arrested in front of everyone, her kids crying in the stroller beside her. Jason said it was one of the lowest moments in Rachel's life. But it wasn't the end of her story. That arrest led her to a public defender who connected her to a local church group that helped single mothers. They helped her find temporary housing, get her kids into daycare, and eventually secure a part-time job. The charges were eventually dropped. Technically, it was a misdemeanor theft case, but the court opted for community service and probation given the circumstances. Rachel completed every requirement. She never stole again. She's spent the last 6 years trying to rebuild her life. Today, Rachel works as a receptionist at a dental clinic. It's not glamorous, and she still lives paycheck to paycheck. But her kids are healthy, well-fed, and happy. Jason told me how Rachel still sometimes skips meals so her kids can have seconds. She doesn't complain. She doesn't ask for pity. She just keeps going. I was quiet for a long time after Jason finished telling me everything. I felt this overwhelming mix of emotions: sadness for what Rachel went through, guilt for not knowing sooner, and frustration at how quickly my parents had dismissed her as just a thief. It's easy to judge someone when you only hear the headline, "Woman arrested for shoplifting." It's much harder to judge when you know the full story. Single mom with no support stole food after escaping abuse and trying to keep her kids from going hungry. But my parents don't care about context. To them, character is black and white. Either you're respectable, or you're not. Either you've done everything right, or you've failed, and if you've failed, you're not welcome. I now realize Rachel's arrest was never about criminal intent, it was about desperation. She was a mother trying to survive a broken system, trying to feed her children when no one else would help. And what breaks my heart most is that this moment, this single, painful moment from her past, is still being used to define her years later. Not by Jason, not by her kids, not even by the law, but by my parents. I can't deny that I once felt uneasy too. Not because I believed Rachel was a bad person, but because I was afraid of how her presence might be judged by others. Weddings are full of people you barely know, and the last thing you want is gossip. But now that I know her story, I see how wrong that fear is. If anything, Rachel deserves to be there more than half the guests on our list, because she's someone who's fought for everything she has. Who's been through hell and came back stronger. Rachel isn't just Jason's sister. She's a reminder of what resilience looks like. And now that I truly understand what she went through, I'm beginning to question not her place at the wedding, but my own silence in defending it. When my parents offered to help pay for the wedding, it felt like a generous, supportive gesture. Something they genuinely wanted to do to make the day special. I'm their only child, and they've always talked about how excited they were to one day walk me down the aisle and throw the kind of wedding they never had. My mom, in particular, had big dreams: the floral arrangements, the tiered cake, the perfect white dress. She had Pinterest boards of her own and loved sending me links to wedding favors and centerpiece ideas. For a while, it felt like we were bonding over something beautiful. That was before Rachel's name came up. It happened casually, almost too casually. We were sitting at the kitchen table going over the guest list. My dad was sipping his coffee while my mom highlighted names and murmured comments like, "Oh, we haven't seen them in years." Or, "Do we really need to invite your cousin's ex-wife?" It was tedious, but familiar. Then she paused and asked, "Rachel, that's Jason's sister, right?" I nodded, distracted. "Yeah, she's coming, of course." There was a moment of silence. Then she said, "Isn't she the one who went to jail for stealing?" The way she said jail felt like a slap. Not curious, not concerned, accusatory, judging. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure how much she knew or where she'd even heard that. Maybe from one of my aunts who always seemed to dig up gossip from nowhere. I hesitated, then simply said, "She went through a really hard time." It wasn't what it sounds like. But my mom wasn't listening. "Emma, I'm sorry, but that's not the kind of person we want at our daughter's wedding." I blinked, stunned. She's Jason's sister. That doesn't change the fact that she's a criminal. She stole food for her kids. I said, more firmly this time. It wasn't some robbery. She was desperate. She's not a danger to anyone. My dad, who had been quiet up until that point, chimed in. "Look, we're not saying she's a bad person. But people talk. You know how guests will whisper. And if we're footing the bill for this wedding, we want it to reflect our family values. Our family values. That phrase stuck with me like a bitter aftertaste. What values were they referring to? Exactly? Judging others without knowing their full story? Believing that redemption isn't possible? I was furious, but more than that, I was heartbroken. This was the moment I realized that their support came with conditions. That their love, at least in this case, had strings attached. If Rachel attends, my mother continued, we're out. We won't be contributing financially. She said it so flatly, like it was a business transaction. Like a woman's dignity could be weighed against a catering budget. I couldn't believe it. My parents, who always prided themselves on generosity and kindness, were drawing the line at a woman who had fought her way out of poverty and humiliation just to survive. Jason wasn't there at the time, but I told him later that evening. We were in our apartment. The lights low, dishes from dinner still in the sink. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told him exactly what they'd said, including the word criminal. He didn't get angry, not in the way you'd expect. He just sat very still, like he was processing the fact that people who would soon become his in-laws had just rejected someone he loved deeply. I'm not surprised, he finally said, voice quiet, but it still hurts. He told me that Rachel had faced judgment before, neighbors, teachers, even other moms at her kids' school. People looked at her like she was a cautionary tale instead of a human being. But he hadn't expected it from my family. Especially not at a time like this. I don't want a wedding without her. He said simply, she's my sister. That was the moment I realized how deep this cut really was. I wasn't just choosing between guest lists and flower arrangements. I was being asked to choose between the people who raised me and the person I wanted to spend my life with, and by extension, his family. I went back to my parents a few days later, hoping they had calmed down or reconsidered. I tried to reason with them. I explained Rachel's situation in full. I told them about the shelter, the missed food stamps, the crying children in the supermarket. I thought that if they knew the truth, not the rumor or the headline, they might feel differently. They didn't. It's not about the details. My mother said, it's about image, about what people will think. My dad nodded. We don't want whispers about our family. Weddings are public. I was stunned again, not because of their opinion, but because of their priorities. They were more concerned about how Rachel would look than who she actually was. It felt shallow, cruel, and incredibly unfair. After that, I stopped pushing. I knew I wasn't going to change their minds. But something inside me shifted that day. I started to see the wedding less as a dream event and more as a reflection of who we are, me and Jason. What kind of values we want to build our marriage on. What kind of people we want around us on that important day. And while I still haven't made a final decision, one thing is clear. If love is conditional, it's not really love, and if my parents are only willing to support me when things look picture perfect, then maybe their version of family isn't the one I want to model mine after. After days of internal conflict, I finally said it. The words felt foreign in my mouth, clumsy, too sharp, and heavier than I expected. We were sitting at the dining table, folding mock invitations and sipping on lukewarm tea. Jason had just finished sharing a funny story about Rachel's youngest getting peanut butter all over the family dog. And I laughed, but it was a nervous, distracted laugh, because I knew what I was about to say would change everything. I took a breath and said it anyway. Jason, I think we should consider not inviting Rachel to the wedding. He froze. I think part of him didn't believe what he'd just heard. He blinked once. What? I tried to soften my tone, already regretting how blunt I had sounded. I'm not saying I don't like her. My parents made it clear they won't help us if she's there. And without their support, we won't be able to afford the venue. The food, the band, everything we've planned would change. Jason put down the invitation he was holding and leaned back slowly. Like the air around us had just gotten heavier. His eyes didn't narrow in anger, but I could see the pain flicker across his face. So, let me get this straight, he said, carefully. Your parents are fine paying for the wedding, but only if my sister isn't there? I nodded. Yes. I tried talking to them again. I explained everything about what she went through. They don't care. They think her past makes her a liability. Like she's going to ruin the image of the wedding or make people talk. He didn't say anything right away. Just looked at me. And for the first time since we'd gotten engaged, I felt a real distance between us. Emma, he said quietly, Rachel is my family. She practically raised me. I wouldn't be the man you fell in love with without her. She has done everything for me, and after everything she's survived. You want me to tell her she's not welcome at my wedding? My throat tightened. I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want to hurt Rachel either. But I was terrified of what would happen if we lost my parents' financial support. We'd already paid deposits we might not get back. We'd chosen a venue that wasn't refundable. Our guest list was long. The caterer, the photographer, even my dress. So much of it was already in motion. I just want this day to be beautiful, I whispered, and I don't want it to fall apart because of one decision. Jason leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands folded together like he was trying to hold himself in place. You want to talk about one decision? How about the one where we let your parents decide who's worthy of attending the most important day of our lives? Do you realize what kind of message that sends? That redemption doesn't matter? That people with a past, even if they've paid for it and grown, don't deserve joy? I didn't respond. I couldn't, because he was right. Deep down, I knew it, but I was also scared. Scared of disappointing my parents. Scared of walking away from the vision I had of our wedding since I was a kid. Scared of the whispers. Of the sideways glances if someone recognized Rachel and remembered that old story. Scared of trading acceptance for integrity. I love her, Emma, he said finally, voice soft but steady. She's my sister, and I know this wedding is for both of us. But if she's not there, it won't feel like it's mine anymore. I looked at him and realized that this wasn't just about one person missing from a guest list. It was about identity, loyalty, family, and the wedge that was now forming between the family I came from and the one I was about to build. I tried to explain again. I didn't think it would come to this. I thought maybe there was a way to make everyone happy. There's not, he said, not this time. The words stung, but I knew they were true. This wasn't a problem we could fix with compromise or middle ground. Either Rachel came, or she didn't. Either my parents funded the wedding, or they didn't. There was no elegant solution. Only lines being drawn. That night, Jason slept on the couch, not because we were angry, but because neither of us could sleep lying beside someone who was breaking their heart trying to protect someone else. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. I remembered the look on Rachel's face the first time I met her, how shy she was. How she'd brought a small candle as a housewarming gift when Jason and I moved in together. It wasn't expensive. It probably cost a few dollars at the drugstore. But it smelled like vanilla and warmth. And I kept it in our bathroom ever since. I wondered what she would think if she knew she was the reason our wedding might fall apart. Or maybe she'd blame herself. Maybe she'd offer not to come at all. But that wasn't fair either. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine our wedding day, walking down the aisle, holding Jason's hands, saying our vows, and in that moment, I knew something. If Jason looked out into the crowd and didn't see his sister there, the joy in his smile would be dimmed, and no dress or flowers or venue could cover that up. The next morning, Jason made coffee like usual, but everything about the air between us felt different, heavy, quiet, like we were both dancing around the question we hadn't answered the night before. What now? He set my cup down in front of me, black with a splash of oat milk, just how I like it, and sat across from me at the kitchen table. The silence stretched for a moment before he finally spoke. I've been thinking, he said, gently, what if we just made it smaller? I blinked. Smaller? He nodded. What if we have a more intimate wedding, something simpler? Something we can afford on our own. With some help from my parents? No strings. No conditions. It took me a second to register what he meant. I glanced toward the binder that sat on the kitchen counter, the one filled with vendor contracts, menus, seating charts, and dreams my mother had practically designed for me. All of it had been built on the foundation of her support. Her money. Her approval. If we do that, I said slowly, we'd lose everything we've already planned. I know, Jason said, but maybe that's not the worst thing. I stared at him, trying to figure out if he really meant it. And he did. I could tell from the look in his eyes, steadfast, calm, but weary, the kind of tired that comes from carrying a weight too long and finally setting it down. I don't want our wedding to be a war zone, he said. I don't want to start our life together by asking my sister to sit this one out so we can keep a nicer venue and a fancier cake. That's not the marriage I want to build with you. I looked down at my coffee, feeling like my insides were being pulled in opposite directions. One part of me felt immense relief, like maybe there was a way out of the emotional gridlock we'd been trapped in. But another part of me felt like I was letting go of something huge. I had dreamed of my wedding since I was a little girl. Not for the extravagance, but for the symbolism, the big white dress, the long aisle, the hundreds of eyes watching as I said, I do. And yet, what good was any of that if I couldn't look Jason in the eye and know we were making choices that honored who we really were? Jason reached across the table and gently took my hand. I know this is a lot to process. But think about it. We wouldn't owe your parents anything. We wouldn't have to bend to anyone's judgment. It would just be us. Us, and the people who love us unconditionally. I thought about what that wedding might look like. A garden, maybe, or the small community center where his parents renewed their vows. Fewer guests, fewer expectations, but more meaning, more intimacy. I imagined Rachel sitting in the front row, her kids fidgeting in their seats, her face lit up with pride instead of shame. And suddenly, the idea didn't feel like a loss. It felt like freedom, but the guilt still clung to me. My parents will be furious, I whispered. They'll say I'm choosing your family over them. Jason's eyes didn't waver. You're choosing us, our future. And if they can't support that unless they get to control the guest list, then maybe they're not supporting you at all. It was hard to hear, but it was also true. I thought about how easily my parents had weaponized money, how they dangled it like a reward for obedience, not as a gift of love. And I thought about the kind of love Jason showed me every day, steady, kind, uncompromising in the things that mattered. I didn't want to build a marriage rooted in fear or performance. I wanted something real, something honest. Would we even be able to pull it off? I asked, brushing a tear away. Jason smiled softly. We might have to cut a few things. Smaller venue, DIY flowers. Maybe my mom makes your bouquet. I laughed through the tears. That would actually be really sweet. He squeezed my hand. It might not be the wedding your mom dreamed of, but it'll be the wedding we chose. And I think that matters more. I nodded, slowly at first, then with growing certainty. Maybe this was never about the cake or the seating chart. Maybe the real question was, what kind of life were we about to start? One shaped by appearances and conditions? Or one built on love that saw people fully, even with their flaws and scars? I'll call the planner, I said, voice quiet but clear. We'll figure out what we can change. Jason leaned over the table and kissed my forehead. Whatever we end up with, I'm just glad I get to marry you. And for the first time in weeks, I felt light, not because things were fixed, but because we were choosing each other, not just in theory, but in practice. We didn't have a fairy tale anymore, but we had something better. We had the truth, and sometimes, that's enough to start forever. Even after everything, after Jason's quiet strength, his suggestion to build a smaller, simpler wedding free of my parents' influence, I still wasn't sure. I hated that I wasn't sure. We sat on the floor one evening, surrounded by candles and a half-eaten pizza, going over a new, scaled-down version of our wedding. The numbers were tighter now, the venue more modest. Jason had even joked about using his uncle's backyard if things got really bad. And to his credit, he never pressured me, not once. He just waited. He gave me space to choose the life I said I wanted. But inside, I felt torn in two. Because I still couldn't shake the thought, what if I did ask him one more time to leave Rachel off the guest list? It made me feel small and selfish to even think it. But the fear was still there, quiet, deep-rooted, and incredibly loud in my mind. Fear of judgment, of whispers, of everything we'd worked for unraveling if someone said the wrong thing. Or if my parents never looked at me the same way again. Was that such a ridiculous thing to want? Peace, order, a day without scandal? I stared at the guest list again. Our new list was down to 50 names. 50. I could almost hear my mother's voice in the back of my head. That's not a wedding. That's a backyard barbecue. And maybe she was right. Maybe this was smaller than I imagined. Rougher around the edges. Stripped of polish. But it was also closer to the truth. Closer to us. Still, I couldn't let go of that nagging thought. Maybe if Rachel sat this one out, everything could still work. My parents might change their minds. We could still afford the venue I loved. Keep the band, the flowers, the cake tasting. I wouldn't have to feel like I'd disappointed anyone. No family feuds. No awkward conversations at the reception. No explaining why the bride's side isn't here. And I'd still be marrying Jason. But every time I let my mind drift there, imagining the ceremony without Rachel, I saw his face again from that night we fought. How tired he looked. How deeply hurt. Because to him, this wasn't about money or prestige or appearances. To him, this was about belonging. Rachel wasn't just his sister who had a rough patch. She was a survivor, a fighter, the one who gave him rides to school, who cooked dinner when their mom worked 2 jobs, who held him when their dad walked out, the one who still showed up for him, always. And I was asking him to tell that person she didn't belong at the happiest day of his life. When I put it that way, it sounded cruel, but I wasn't trying to be cruel. I just wanted something that didn't feel like a compromise of everything I had grown up picturing. I wanted to feel proud of our wedding day. Not defensive. I finally confessed it out loud one night. Jason, I said, curling up next to him on the couch. I'm still not sure if I can do this. He didn't pull away. He didn't sigh or roll his eyes. He just waited. I know you want her there. I continued. And I know what she means to you. But this new plan, it changes everything. The venue, the look, the feel, it's not what I imagined. And part of me wonders if I'm wrong for still wanting the original wedding. Even if it means she can't come. Jason was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Emma, you're allowed to grieve the wedding you wanted. I get it. We've both had to let go of things lately. But I think the bigger question isn't what kind of wedding we want. It's what kind of marriage we're building. He turned to face me. His expression was gentle but serious. If we start this life together by cutting out the people who matter most to us because they don't fit into a neat little box, then what are we really building? I don't want to stand at that altar and feel like I had to betray someone just to get there. His words sat with me. I looked at him. This man I loved. This man I chose. And I realized how much courage it had taken for him to stand up to me. Not with anger, but with grace, with love. And then I looked inward. Was it really Rachel I was afraid of? Or was I afraid of not being perfect in my parents' eyes? Afraid that their version of love had always been conditional, and now I was finally seeing it clearly? I didn't answer Jason that night. But I stayed awake for a long time. Thinking about the kind of woman I wanted to be. The kind of partner. The kind of daughter. And most importantly, the kind of family I wanted to build from here on out. And I wondered, am I wrong for still wanting her not to be there? Maybe I was wrong for letting fear guide me instead of love. Maybe I was wrong for thinking a perfect wedding mattered more than the people in it. But maybe being wrong is what helps us grow. Maybe admitting that is the first real step toward becoming the woman I actually want to be.